Hello, folks. So, in this video, I wanted to talk about what is the meaning of blast radius in the context of computers, computer science, software industry, computer networks, and whatnot, right? So, anything in the digital area, right? So, let's get started. So, the concept of blast radius comes from the idea of a blast, right? So let's actually write down blast radius. All right. So the idea comes from the concept of bomb blasts, right? So it's basically, let's drop a bomb now, right? So I think that's like a classic bomb that's black and has like a wire to it, and then you can light it up and it can go boom, or something that looks like a dynamite, right? Which can go boom when you light it up. So it comes from the concept of bomb blasts, right? So blast radius, what it means is, let's say a bomb blasts over here, right? And let's say you have a physical area, right? You have a very big physical area, even bigger, let's say, right? Let's say this whole screen is the area, right? Then your blast radius, it basically, let's say this is the point where the bomb blasts, right? The blast radius is all about how much, what is the radius. So they assume that a circular area is actually from the top. Let's say you are looking at a ground from the top. A circular area is actually affected by the blast, is what is assumed or thought of, or it's approximated as a circular area, I think. So in the real world, it would actually be like a cylindrical area of sorts or a spherical area of sorts, right? A very big area. From the top, it will just look like a circle, right? And from the top, it will look like a circle. And I'm really bad at drawing circles, I think. So let's just assume that this is the center of the circle, right? I think I should have drawn the circle and then put the center directly after that. Anyway, so let's assume this is the circle and this is the circular area that is affected by the bomb blast, right? The bomb blast happens here at this point, and this whole area, we are looking at the ground from the top view. This is the top view, right? And so this whole area is getting affected. Let's say there are people or shops or whatever, and they're all getting affected, dying or getting injured, or there's a lot of injury happening to any organism that is there in this area, right? And there's a lot of destruction happening to anything that is there in the area. So this is kind of like the center of this circle from the top view. And and you basically look at the radius of this, right? Radius of this circle. Usually they call it in kilometers in the case of, I think, bomb blasts. This much kilometer is the blast radius and whatnot. Like, I think, I'm assuming, I'm not sure. So then you basically say that the area from top, the area that is inside this circle, inside this blast radius circle will be affected. So hence, for a given bomb, if the blast radius, approximated or expected blast radius is say 10 kilometers, they will move everyone and every person out of this blast radius, out of this blast radius point. They'll bring them here, right? They'll move them from here to here, right? So that's the idea of blast radius, right, in the real world. Now, what does it mean in computer networks or computer science and whatnot? So basically, let's say you are actually running a system, you have many systems and whatnot, and it's usually interconnected by multiple systems. Let's say you have system A, which talks to system B, right, which talks to system, and these talk to, like, A talks to B, A talks to C, and let's say B talks to D, right, C talks to E, right, let's say D and E talk to F, right, and F is kind of like a standalone service. These are all systems, let's say, okay. These are all systems, right? You have a big system which contain other small systems and all that. If you want an example, this can be a web API, this can be the API gateway or whatever, or there can be an API gateway here, API gateway, and this can be a microservice. A can be a microservice or a service. B, C, D, E, F can be services, or in a general term, they can be all systems. So they're all systems. They all can be systems, and they can do some work and return some response. Let's say there is some failure in your system, right? It can be a network failure, it can be a system failure, it can be anything, any error, right? Failure or error. So blast radius is all about when some error happens, what other systems or what other areas of the system get affected. For example, let's say F dies, right? Let's say F dies. Then what happens, right? Let's say A is the only microservice that is exposed to the outside world, and the request comes to A talks to B, A talks to C, they all talk to DE, they all try to talk to F, but then F is not working. So now E is affected, D is affected. Because D and E are affected, now B is affected, C is affected. Because B and C are affected, even if one of these get affected, A gets affected, right? I mean, this is assuming that A depends on the output of B, C, and B depends on the output of D, C depends on the output of E, and D and E depend on the output of F, right? If they are standalone and can work even if F fails, and like each of them is standalone even if the dependent service fails, then it's great, right? But if it is not the case, then if F fails, the blast radius is basically all of these systems, D, E, B, C, A, and eventually the whole system, because that's all the whole system is all about, because the API gateway is basically just exposing this one service in this case, right? So that's what the blast radius is all about. Talking about what happens if there is an error in a system or a network or a platform or whatever, right? Any area in your system, if there's a failure, what and all will it affect? And that basically comes under the blast radius. So another example is basically, for example, I have done migration of systems, and I've done it in bad ways. I've done it in the wrong, worst ways. For example, we have system A, and we have some resources in these. Let's say resource 1, resource 2, resource 3, some metadata or data, right? And then we have system B, which is like the new system. This is like the brand new stuff, right? And you have no resources over here, and you need to move R1, R2, R3, and then this goes on, and you have say till Rn, right? Now you need to move all of this to here. Now what I have done with my team, this was, let's say, I think in 2018, 2019 timeline, right? What happened was we actually migrated all the resources, all the data in one go, right? The problem was some of the data that we migrated, it didn't work, or the teams that were using the data or working with the data didn't want the move to happen, right? And they had issues with the movement of the data, or they had issues with the migration, right? So we made a lot of mistakes over there. So basically, let's call it as R1, capital R, after it's migrated, R2. We did this in one go, right? R4, R3, and whatnot, and then Rn. We did this in one go. Now, the problem with that is, if there's an error, we have to roll back the whole thing, right? The blast radius is basically large when you actually move a lot of data. If you move less data, then the blast radius is less because only less data is affected or less stuff is affected, right? You move less data or move or migrate. In the case of a migration, you do a smooth migration slowly and steadily, then the blast radius is less, right? Like if some issue occurs, you can easily roll back because it's only less data, right? Is less, right? But if you move all of the data at once, then the blast radius is pretty high, and a lot of systems get affected, a lot of things get affected, and then you'll have to do a big rollback, right? So when you do migrations, it's important to understand to do a smooth migration, smooth migration, slow migration, right? And then phase by phase, you have to do it in phases and do a lot of testing, right? And validation. Testing and validation is very important, it's key, and you should have rollback strategies, right? Rollback strategies and retry and redo strategies or redo strategies, right? So you should have those also. So yeah, that is blast radius basically. So if a system gets affected, if a network gets affected, if some part of the system gets affected, something gets affected in your big software system or whatever that you're working with, what and all it affects, and depending on that you define the blast radius and say that there are all these items or systems or subsystems or things inside the blast radius, and these all will get affected. So yeah, that's all I had for this video talking about blast radius. Let me take a picture of myself. I look good. So yeah, that's all I had for this video. I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.